While we are transfixed by Trump's mugshot and marveling at the post-GOP debate polls, some very different news was happening far across the globe that may end up being actually more important historically than anything else going on here. The BRICS nations, also known as Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, formally adopted 6 new countries into their informal economic conference, explicitly challenging U.S. hegemony and gives us a better glimpse at what a multipolar future may look like. The new nations added include Iran, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Argentina, Egypt, and Ethiopia. Important first to note that the decision to formally invite these nations into the alliance at all is an explicit victory for China. It sparred with its other great power alliance member, India, over whether to expand the bloc at all. Clearly, India was outvoted, with South Africa sitting also on the sidelines, as China explicitly seeks to use the BRICS to counterweight the Western-led G7. Now, given China's victory in outvoting India in the alliance, it is important then to further note who and why. And it doesn't take a genius to see what's going on here. The inclusion of Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iran, and Egypt is an explicit challenge to the Western-led order in the Middle East. These countries collectively export a vast portion of the world's oil supply, and China, of course, is sucking up as much as it possibly can to fuel their industrial capacity and keep up with the demands of the Chinese middle class. The willingness, it seems here, for Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the UAE, and Iran to even accept the alliance invitation is an explicit rebuke of President Biden, and it shows how much we are already taking our eye off the ball where it actually matters. China has already pulled off a massive diplomatic coup. They're getting the Gulf Arabs and the Iranians to stop hating each other and unite against the West. Furthermore, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Egypt collectively have been given some untold trillions of dollars in U.S. economic and military aid. Yet, when given an invitation, they are happy to snub their nose at us, even while all of them, save Iran, will still get some of the largest foreign aid distributions of any other nations on Earth from the United States. What might be an even more important legacy than a slow realignment of the entire Middle East is also their open war on the U.S. dollar. President Lula of Brazil at the summit called outright for a BRICS nation to consider a common currency for trade and investment between each other as a means of circumventing the petrodollar, but also for a very obvious reason. China, Russia, India, the Gulf Arab states, and Iran are all pretty sick of transacting in dollar terms after the war in Ukraine that spurned Western sanctions on Russian oil. And to be clear, they very quickly found a way around it. But now, instead of doing backroom deals, they want to simply price deals between themselves in their own denominated currency. This, too, is not just to ease trade, but to make it effectively impossible for the long arm of Western sanctions to touch any of these nations should conflict break out, or if the West seeks to compel any of their behavior with sanctions in the future. In fact, something I warned about in the very early days of the Ukraine war was that we were wasting one of the most important levers that we have on the global economy on a matter that is of no importance to us. Our dominance of the global financial system is something you should only leverage in a time of imminent peril. And considering how little that Ukraine actually matters to the US way of life, I think it is now obvious it was a huge mistake, because not only did it not work against the Russian war machine, which is doing fine, but it also showed our hand to nations like China, with whom we may find ourselves in a standoff over matters that actually matter a hell of a lot more to us. They didn't get to where they are about being stupid. They saw it, and they immediately began sanction-proofing their entire economy and global supply chain. Hence why it is such a diplomatic coup to get the oil-producing states into the BRICS alliance and the beginning of talks of trade between those nations without the dollar. We may not have a goddamn thing to say about any of this in the future. Even nations not fully on board with the idea of BRICS currency, like South Africa and India, are still expressing hope in moving to total denomination of trade in their currencies at the summit. All of this accelerated realignment against the Western system is a direct consequence of our policy towards Ukraine. Again, a nation which matters less to us in terms of trade, security, and stability than every nation that I just discussed here. In fact, the only reason that the summit has gained any attention whatsoever is because of Ukraine. Dozens of nations, other than the ones I listed here, are lusting after BRICS status and eager to get out from underneath the thumb of Western control. We are watching directly and in real time. Those who don't agree with us pursue other suitors like China, or simply pursue independence of our reach. People should not construe this monologue as saying the whole Western system is dead. That is foolish. That is obviously wrong. The only point is that the near 75 years of the Western-led international order, which of course has reaped gigantic benefits for the U.S. economy and the U.S. way of life, is weaker today than it has been for decades. We need to prepare vigorously for the unstable system which our foolish leaders have wrought. Biden, the Washington establishment, they have tied our fates completely to the sinking boat of Europe, which is mired in demographic and economic decline, while the rest of the world, who we actually depend on to fund the American way of life, goes in a completely different direction. The more that the gap in those interests accelerate, the more uncertainty is injected into the system, and the more likely that war breaks out, putting millions of people at risk. We have absolutely nobody to blame but ourselves for this situation. So anyway, I see a lot of people being—
Hey guys, obviously I had a lot of thoughts on what Saagar had to say there. So if you want to see my thoughts on this monologue and every other Saagar monologue, make sure you subscribe at breakingpoints.com.